Would Jesus be a Republican or a Democrat? He's compassionate for the sick and the poor, so does that mean he would lean left? Does the requirement of living a holy and traditional life mean that he would be conservative? This is a big question, and to answer it, we're going to have to look deep into the heart of what Jesus taught. Jesus would most likely tell us to focus on the kingdom of God and him versus policy and politics, but let's imagine for a moment. We're going to look at the major issues that divide Democrats and Republicans to see in his own words which side Jesus would align with more today. Social programs like welfare, food, and housing assistance are foundational to the Democratic Party. Caring for the sick and the poor line up perfectly with the emphasis Jesus placed on helping others, especially the less fortunate. Matthew 25:40 says that whenever we help the most seemingly unimportant people, we're actually doing it for God himself. Jesus made it abundantly clear that helping others isn't just a recommendation, but a direct reflection of our love for him. Without a doubt, when it comes to social programs to help the poor, Jesus would align with the Democrats. But it does get a little more complicated than that. Jesus also advocates for personal responsibility, a staple part of Republican beliefs. Republicans generally believe that everyone is responsible for their own actions, lives, and the well-being of their families, and Jesus would also agree. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, "Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 10 says the apostles lived by a code where whoever didn't work didn't eat. The Bible also teaches personal accountability for our spiritual lives. Romans 14:12 says that everyone will give an account for their lives to God. The Bible pushes us not to blame others and to never become a burden on society. Jesus calls people to take responsibility for their lives, turn from sin, and to actively choose him. He knows that to have faith requires personal commitment. Many Republicans would argue that government programs can sometimes create dependency rather than empowering people to stand on their own, and Jesus' teachings on personal responsibility line up with this. In Acts 2:45, we learn the apostles lived together and would sell their property and possessions to help the needy among them, proving that it's possible to have a welfare system outside of government programs. I believe this idea of helping each other lines up closely with the teachings of Jesus too. Point for the Republicans. Jesus was not at all opposed to taxes. In fact, in Matthew 22:21, when he was asked if they should pay taxes, he said to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to give to God what is God's.
Whose face and name are these on it? Caesar! Then give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.
Combining this with Jesus' passion to help the less fortunate, I believe Jesus would approve of higher taxes on the wealthy. When it comes to unaliving babies or fetus deletus, Jesus believed that all life is inherently valuable and has potential. Jesus lived with full, unrelenting faith in God. To believe that life would be better without a child, or that a child would be better off never being born, is a lack of faith in God and what he can do. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." Even though God was talking to Jeremiah the prophet, this shows that God forms us and can formulate the plan for our entire lives before we're even born. Jesus would view fetus deletus as interfering with God's plan and taking his place as the giver and taker of life. This stems from a lack of faith, on top of the commandment, "You shall not unalive each other," which might apply here. Point for the Republicans. Speaking of Republicans, what about guns? Glizzies, being strapped up. Jesus taught that if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. But it gets a little more complicated than that. In Luke 22:36, Jesus told his disciples to buy a sword if they don't already have one. But before you go off and buy an artillery, Jesus said that having the swords would fulfill a prophecy about him being considered a criminal. In Matthew 26:52, Jesus rebuked Peter when he actually used the sword. This is where he says that whoever pulls out the sword will die by it. It could be that the sword was more of a deterrent rather than something that was meant to be used. So maybe Jesus would support the Second Amendment? But we know it's wrong to take a life. In fact, it's one of the very first things that God commanded us not to do. And restricting access to guns lines up with the philosophy of turning the other cheek. Point for both sides. Democrats are big on criminal justice reform and rehabilitation. Isaiah 1:17 tells us to seek justice, do what's right, and to defend the oppressed. Jesus brings mercy to sinners. He forgave the adulterous woman in John 8:11 and brought tax collectors and criminals into a circle, which was unheard of. He consistently sought to redeem, not to punish. However, he made it very clear that his second coming will be to judge the world and separate the righteous from the wicked. Anyone whose name is not written in the book of life will be thrown into the lake of fire. Still, I think everyone would agree that Jesus would not approve of capital punishment, as the death penalty puts life in the hands of people rather than God. Condemning someone to a final judgment contradicts with Jesus' teachings of mercy and redemption. Proverbs 31:9 tells us to judge fairly and to defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Point for the Democrats. Speaking of Democrats, what about climate change and conserving the earth? In Genesis 2:15, 15, God commanded Adam and Eve to work and take care of the Garden of Eden. But Psalm 24:1 says that the earth and everything in it belongs to God. Jeremiah 32:27 makes it clear that nothing is too difficult for God. Acting out of fear that the earth will deteriorate shows a lack of faith, because God can do all things. Jesus had full faith that God can do anything, and one of the hardest Bible verses for me to accept is Matthew 6:34, which tells us not to worry about tomorrow, because every day has its own troubles. This one is close, but I know Jesus would prioritize people and wholesome values over reducing the damage that God will easily reverse after the second coming of Christ. Point for the Republicans. Jesus lives for the idea of loving all people. He especially loves the sick, the poor, and the marginalized. Jesus went against societal rules by associating with tax collectors, people with leprosy, and Samaritans. In Galatians 3:28, Paul makes it clear that we are all one person in Jesus Christ. I have no doubt that Jesus would be an advocate for open borders and ending any kind of discrimination. However, while Jesus has deep love for all people, he does not align with many beliefs and lifestyles. 1 Corinthians 6:9 says, "Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God." There's a spoken and unspoken rule in the Democratic Party that if you're not interfering with others, you're free to pursue your own happiness, while the Republican Party believes in upholding and maintaining values that don't change. Jesus undoubtedly believes in objective truth. In fact, he said he is the truth. Jesus taught that despite not directly hurting others, causing others to sin is one of the worst things you could ever do. Matthew 18:6 says, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." Point for the right side. Republicans generally push for a strong national defense, while Democrats focus more on diplomacy and peace efforts. So where does Jesus stand? Jesus himself was not an advocate for violent conquest, but promotes peace and forgiveness. Matthew 5:9 says that people who are peacemakers are blessed and will be called children of God. Having a large military shows a lack of faith in God and contradicts with Jesus' teachings about not clinging to the things of this world. This one for sure goes to the Democrats. I didn't actually think it would come this close, but as Christians, I believe we should side with the person that acknowledges and gives thanks to God. Based on this and Jesus' hard stance on certain issues, I believe Jesus would be more of a Republican. In John 18:36, Jesus made it clear that his kingdom is not of this world. He didn't concern himself too much with politics, but rather spreading the goodness of his message. What do you think? Did I miss anything? Did I get anything wrong? Does this change the way you view either of the parties or Jesus himself? Share this video with someone you love and let me know in the comments. As always, God bless you and I'll catch you in the next one.
Way too low.